The emergency alert pierced through the quiet hum of Earth's Deep Space Command Center at exactly 3:47 a.m. Red warning lights bathed the control room as technicians scrambled to their stations. Commander Jake Morrison had been reviewing routine patrol reports when the transmission burst through their long-range sensors. The signal was weak, fragmented, and desperate. Through the static and interference, Morrison could make out terrified voices speaking in the Universal Translation Protocol. The Altarians were calling for help, and their world was dying. Morrison pulled up the holographic display showing the Outer Rim territories. Nexus Prime appeared as a small blue dot, impossibly far from Earth's protected space. The planet hosted 3 million Altarian colonists who had spent decades building peaceful mining settlements. They had no military, no weapons, no way to defend themselves against what was coming. The transmission continued playing, and Morrison felt his blood run cold. Children were screaming in the background. Explosions thundered through the speakers. Someone was sobbing about their family being taken away in chains. The Altarians weren't just under attack, they were being systematically destroyed. Lieutenant Amy Brooks rushed over with a datapad, her usually calm face twisted with anger. She had been monitoring galactic communications all morning, watching. As the crisis unfolded across multiple star systems, the situation was far worse than anyone had initially realized. The Vorthan Empire had arrived 3 days ago with a massive invasion fleet. Their ships were enormous, each one capable of reducing entire cities to ash. They moved from world to world like a plague, demanding complete surrender from every population they encountered. Those who resisted were eliminated. Those who surrendered became slaves. General Crix commanded the Vorthon forces with ruthless efficiency. His broadcasts, 2 conquered worlds, were always the same: submit immediately or watch your civilization burn. He had perfected this strategy across dozens of campaigns, and it had never failed him. Entire species had bent the knee rather than face extinction. Brooks showed Morrison the latest intelligence reports. The Vorthan Empire controlled over 40 star systems and commanded millions of enslaved beings from conquered races. Their military doctrine was based on overwhelming force and absolute terror. They didn't negotiate, didn't show mercy, and didn't leave survivors among those who opposed them. Morrison studied the tactical data with growing horror. The Vorthan fleet surrounding Nexus Prime included 12 massive dreadnoughts, each one bigger than Earth's largest space station. 40 heavy cruisers provided escort, while hundreds of smaller ships descended to the planet's surface. The Altarians had nothing that could even scratch the paint on these vessels. The worst part was watching the galactic community's response. Morrison pulled up the official communications from the Galactic Council, the supposed peacekeeping organization that governed civilized space. Their statement was brief and cold. They classified the Vorthan invasion as a regional security matter. It didn't warrant intervention. Other major powers echoed the Council's position. The Zenthari Republic was too busy with internal politics to get involved. The Crystalline Federation claimed they lacked the military resources for such a distant operation. The Trade Alliance worried that interfering would disrupt their commercial relationships with Vorthan-controlled territories. Everyone had excuses. Everyone had reasons to look the other way, while innocent people suffered and died. Everyone except humanity. Brooks played another transmission from Nexus Prime, and Morrison had to steady himself against the console. An Altarian father was begging someone, anyone, to help save his daughter who had been dragged away by Vorthan soldiers. His voice broke as he described watching his neighbors loaded into slave transport ships. Morrison had seen enough. His personal communication device sent an encrypted message to Fleet Command. The response came back within minutes. Admiral Davis was already reviewing the situation and preparing contingency plans. Earth's military leadership had been watching the Vorthan advance with growing concern. Within 2 hours, deployment orders flashed across every major human naval base. The newest ships in Earth's fleet received immediate mobilization commands. Crews who had been on leave were recalled to active duty. Weapon systems that had only been tested in simulations were loaded with live ammunition. Morrison watched the fleet preparation updates scroll across the screen. Their species might debate and hesitate, but humans had a different approach to protecting the innocent. When someone called for help, Earth answered. The Vorthan Empire was about to learn something that would change galactic politics forever. Humans didn't abandon those who needed them most. Admiral Tom Davis had commanded Earth's most advanced battle fleet for 3 years, but he had never seen his crew move with such determination. The bridge of the UES Retribution buzzed with activity as officers prepared for immediate departure. Every station hummed with purpose, while technicians ran final system checks on weapons that had never been fired in actual combat. Davis walked between the command stations, watching his people work. Unlike the bureaucratic delays that plagued other galactic civilizations, humanity operated with military precision. When innocent lives were at stake, Earth didn't waste time with committee meetings or political negotiations. They acted. Captain Lisa Martinez pulled up the tactical display, showing the Vorthan fleet's position around Nexus Prime. The holographic projection revealed a sobering reality. The enemy had brought enough firepower to destroy entire star systems. Their dreadnoughts alone could level continents, while their cruiser squadrons carried enough troops to occupy dozens of worlds. Simultaneously, Martinez had spent the morning analyzing Vorthan military doctrine and fleet compositions. Their intelligence suggested the enemy relied heavily on intimidation tactics, using massive ships to terrify opponents into surrender before actual fighting began. It was a strategy that had worked perfectly for decades across the Outer Rim. Territories. Davis studied the numbers with the calm focus of a veteran commander. 12 dreadnoughts represented more raw firepower than most species could field in their entire naval forces. The 40 cruisers carried enough Marines to conquer and occupy multiple star systems, added to hundreds of fighter squadrons and support. Vessels, the Vorthan force, seemed insurmountable, but Davis had fought against impossible odds before. During the Titan campaign, his fleet had faced similar numerical disadvantages and emerged victorious. Through superior tactics and human determination, numbers meant less than the will to fight and the skill to execute complex battle. Its plans under pressure. The Admiral signaled for a fleet-wide communication channel. Across 37 human warships, crews stopped their preparations to listen. These weren't just military personnel, they were volunteers who had joined Earth's defense forces specifically to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Davis looked at the camera that would transmit his words to every ship in the fleet. Behind him, the main view screen showed the starfield they would soon cross to reach the battlefield. In 30 minutes, they would enter hyperspace and commit to a fight that would determine the fate of millions of innocent people. The human fleet represented everything Earth had learned about warfare over centuries of conflict. Ships like the EU's Vengeance carried railguns that could punch through asteroids. The UES Fury mounted plasma cannons that generated temperatures hotter than stellar cores. The UES Wrath carried enough missiles to saturate entire orbital zones. With explosive death, other galactic species built their warships for show, creating impressive vessels designed to intimidate opponents and project political power. Human ships were built for one purpose: winning fights against any enemy, regardless of size or numbers. Every weapon system, every defensive measure, every tactical capability focused on destroying threats to innocent life. Davis began his address to the fleet, his voice carrying across 37 ships and 15,000 crew members. He didn't speak about glory or honor or political objectives. Instead, he reminded them why they wore Earth's uniform and why they had volunteered to serve far from home. The Altarians had called for help. The Galactic Council had labeled their suffering as a regional dispute, not worth intervention. Other major powers had found excuses to avoid getting involved. Meanwhile, children were dying, and families were being torn apart by slavers who treated sentient beings like property. Martinez updated the fleet status display, showing all ships reporting ready for immediate departure. Engineering teams had pushed the reactors to full power, while weapons crews loaded the most advanced munitions Earth had ever developed. The human fleet was smaller than the Vorthan Armada, but every ship carried technology and training that represented humanity's centuries of military evolution. As the countdown reached its final minutes, Davis felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. In 30 minutes, they would discover whether human determination could overcome Vorthan brutality. The fate of 3 million Altarian colonists would depend on what happened when to vary. Different philosophies of warfare collided among the stars. The hyperspace engines began their startup sequence, and Davis gave his final order. Earth was going to war. The space around Nexus Prime had been eerily quiet for 3 days, broken only by the occasional flash of Vorthan weapons bombarding the planet below. General Crix stood on the command deck of his massive flagship, watching his forces systematically break down the last pockets of Altarian resistance. His invasion was proceeding exactly as planned. Overwhelming force, followed by complete submission. Then the stars began to move. 37 ships materialized out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming under the system's twin suns. The human fleet had arrived without warning, dropping directly into the heart of Vorthan-controlled space with an audacity that left enemy commanders speechless. Crix stared at the tactical display in confusion. The newcomer ships were smaller than his dreadnoughts, sleeker than his cruisers, and completely unknown to his intelligence databases. Their design philosophy seemed alien to everything he understood about galactic warfare. No ornate decorations, no intimidating spikes, just smooth metal surfaces that somehow looked more dangerous than his most fearsome vessels. The general activated his communications array, prepared to deliver the same ultimatum that had terrified dozens of species into immediate surrender. But before he could speak, the human ships opened fire. The U.S. Retribution's main railgun spoke first. The projectile crossed the distance between fleets at a significant fraction of light speed, striking Crix's flagship with the force of a small asteroid. The Vorthan shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, offered no protection against solid metal traveling at relativistic velocities. The round punched through defensive barriers, armor plating, and 3 deck levels before finally stopping in the ship's reactor compartment. Crix was thrown to the deck as his mighty flagship shuddered under the impact. Emergency alarms screamed across the bridge while damage reports flooded in from throughout the vessel. His weapons officers stared at their instruments in disbelief. The human ships were using kinetic weapons at ranges where energy beams should have been dominant. The human fleet spread out in attack formation, each ship selecting targets with mechanical precision. Unlike the Vorthan preference for massive, intimidating vessels, Earth's navy favored smaller ships that could maneuver quickly and strike with devastating accuracy. They moved like wolves hunting in a pack, coordinating their attacks to overwhelm individual enemy vessels. Captain Mike Torres waited in the launch bay of the UES, fury as his marine assault teams prepared for boarding operations. Unlike other galactic species who relied on robots or enslaved soldiers, humans sent their own people to fight the most dangerous battles. Torres had volunteered for this mission because he believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The Marines wore powered armor that amplified their natural strength and protected them from the vacuum of space. Their weapons were designed for close-quarters combat aboard enemy vessels, compact rifles that fired armor-piercing rounds, and plasma cutters that could slice through bulkhead doors. Each soldier carried enough firepower to level a small building. Torres led the first boarding pod toward a damaged Vorthon cruiser. The enemy vessel was reeling from multiple railgun hits, shields flickering and its crew struggling to maintain basic systems. Human boarding tactics relied on speed and overwhelming violence. Get aboard fast, secure key areas, and eliminate resistance before the enemy could organize a counterattack. The boarding pod punched through the cruisers, hull like a bullet through paper. Torres and his team emerged into a corridor filled with smoke and emergency lighting. Vorthan soldiers rushed to meet them, firing energy weapons that sparked harmlessly off human armor. The Marines responded with devastating efficiency, their rifles turning the narrow passageway into a killing field. What Torres discovered surprised him. The Vorthan military, despite their reputation for ruthless conquest, relied heavily on fear and intimidation rather than actual fighting skill. When faced with opponents who fought back effectively, they quickly lost their nerve and began retreating toward escape pods down on Nexus Prime's surface. Major Kate Wilson coordinated the Liberation of Altarian prison camps. Her special forces teams had inserted via drop pods during the orbital battle, landing directly inside Vorthan-controlled territory. While enemy attention focused on the space combat above, Wilson watched through her tactical display as human soldiers moved through the slave compounds with surgical precision. They eliminated guards, freed prisoners, and established secure perimeters around civilian populations. Meanwhile, orbital support from the fleet above provided devastating fire support wherever Vorthan forces attempted to regroup. The Altarians stared in amazement as human soldiers carried wounded civilians to safety, while simultaneously calling down precise strikes on enemy positions. These weren't the bureaucratic peacekeepers they had begged for help. These were warriors who understood that protecting innocent life sometimes required overwhelming violence against those who threatened it. General Crix realized with growing horror that his mighty invasion fleet was being systematically destroyed by a force less than half its size. The humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and tactical brilliance that his forces couldn't match. Worse, they showed no fear of his supposedly invincible war machine. The Vorthan Empire was learning a lesson that would echo across the galaxy. Humans were very, very good at warfare. The first Liberation team to enter the Vorthan prison complex on Nexus Prime stopped dead in their tracks. Major Kate Wilson had seen combat on a dozen worlds, but nothing had prepared her for what lay behind those reinforced doors. The stench hit them first, a mixture of fear, pain, and death that spoke of unspeakable horrors. Captain Martinez received the initial reports aboard the UES Retribution, while Admiral Davis coordinated the ongoing space battle. Her hands trembled as she read the findings transmitted from the surface teams. This wasn't just military conquest. This was something far darker and more systematic than anyone had imagined. The Vorthan Empire hadn't simply invaded these worlds to expand their territory or gather resources. They had built an entire infrastructure dedicated to the complete destruction of other species. Prison camps stretched 4 kilometers across the planet's surface, each one designed to process thousands of beings from dozens of different races. Wilson's teams discovered laboratories where Vorthon scientists conducted experiments on living prisoners. Medical facilities that served no healing purpose, only prolonging suffering for research data. Execution chambers designed for mass elimination of populations deemed unsuitable for slavery. The evidence painted a picture of genocide on an industrial scale. The most horrifying discovery came when human soldiers found the record-keeping facilities. Vorthan bureaucrats had documented everything with meticulous detail: which species made the best laborers, which ones could survive in different atmospheric conditions, which ones should be eliminated immediately upon capture. Martinez compiled the intelligence reports with growing horror. The data showed that 17 different worlds had suffered under Vorthan occupation. Over 2 billion sentient beings had been murdered, enslaved, or subjected to medical experimentation. Entire civilizations had been systematically erased from existence. While the galactic community looked the other way, Admiral Davis read the reports in silence, his jaw clenched tight with barely controlled rage. He had commanded Earth's forces through many conflicts, but he had never encountered anything quite like this. The Vorthon Empire wasn't just another aggressive neighbor. They were something that threatened the very concept of civilization itself. Davis opened a communication channel to every Vorthan vessel in the system. His message was simple and direct: surrender immediately or face the consequences. He gave them 1 hour to consider their options, knowing that mercy was more than they had shown their victims. General Crix responded exactly as Davis had expected. The Vorthan commander threatened to execute every remaining prisoner if the human fleet didn't withdraw immediately. He broadcast footage of Altarian civilians being dragged to execution chambers while demanding that Earth abandon its rescue mission. That single transmission changed everything about humanity's approach to this conflict. Davis activated emergency protocols that summoned every available Earth vessel within 50 light-years. Battle groups that had been patrolling distant sectors received immediate deployment orders. Reserve fleets came out of dockyards with skeleton crews and half-empty supply holds. Within days, the largest human armada ever assembled began converging on Vorthan space. Colonel Ryan Foster led the expanded marine operations as human forces spread across multiple star systems. His orders were clear and simple. Find every prison camp, every torture facility, every slaver base, and reduce them to ash. No negotiations, no mercy for those who had shown none to their victims. Foster's troops moved through Vorthon territory like an unstoppable force of nature. They didn't just defeat enemy military units, they hunted down everyone involved in the slavery operations. Transport ships carrying prisoners were boarded and liberated. Supply convoys supporting the camps were destroyed. Administrative centers that coordinated the genocide were leveled from orbit. The human approach to warfare horrified Vorthon commanders, who had grown accustomed to terrorizing helpless civilians. Earth's forces showed a level of systematic destruction that matched the Empire's own brutality but directed toward a very different purpose, where Vorthons built machines for oppression. Humans built machines for liberation. Word of the human campaign spread throughout the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. Species that had suffered under Vorthon rule for generations suddenly realized that someone was finally fighting back. Slave populations began organizing rebellions. Inspired by news of human victories and the promise of freedom, the Vorthon Empire discovered that their greatest weakness wasn't military. It was the fact that their entire civilization depended on the oppression of others. When those others found hope and weapons, the Empire began collapsing from within. Surviving Vorthon officers sent desperate messages to their high command, describing human forces that fought with relentless determination. These weren't ordinary soldiers following orders. They were warriors on a moral crusade, who viewed slavery as an evil that had to be eliminated completely. The galaxy was witnessing something unprecedented. An entire species had declared war, not on territory or resources, but on the concept of treating other beings as property. Humanity had unleashed something that would reshape interstellar politics forever. The grand chambers of the Galactic Council had never seen such chaos. Representatives from hundreds of worlds filled every available seat, while emergency sessions ran around the clock. Reports streamed in from across what had once been Vorthon space, each one more incredible than the last. The mighty empire that had terrorized civilizations for over 3 centuries had simply vanished. Ambassador Robert Hayes sat calmly at the human delegation table, watching alien diplomats argue frantically about the implications of his species' actions. 6 months ago, these same beings had dismissed the Altarian crisis as a minor regional dispute. Now they were demanding explanations for the complete transformation of galactic politics. The Council's intelligence reports painted an unbelievable picture. 47 star systems had been liberated from Vorthon control. Over 3 billion enslaved beings had been freed and returned to their homeworlds. The entire infrastructure of the galaxy's most feared empire had been systematically destroyed by what everyone had considered a minor backwater species. Hayes listened to the heated debates with quiet satisfaction. Council President Veltar was demanding answers about human military capabilities. The Xanthari Republic wanted to know why Earth hadn't sought permission before launching such a massive military operation. The Trade Alliance was complaining about disrupted commerce routes through former Vorthon territory. None of them seemed to understand the most important point. Millions of innocent people were alive today because humanity had acted when no one else would. The ambassador stood to address the assembly. His simple uniform, a stark contrast to the elaborate robes worn by other delegates. He had spent decades in diplomatic service, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. Earth had just proven that one species could reshape the entire galactic order. Through sheer determination and moral clarity, Hayes delivered his prepared statement with the same straightforward honesty that characterized all human diplomacy. His words were simple and direct. Earth had done what needed to be done to protect innocent life. They hadn't sought profit, territory, or political advantage. They had simply responded to a cry for help that everyone else had ignored. The Altarian delegate rose from her seat with tears streaming down her face. Her people had been on the verge of extinction 6 months ago, watching helplessly as their children were dragged away to slave camps. Now they were free, their world rebuilt, their families reunited. She spoke with the passion of someone who had witnessed true heroism. Her testimony silenced the chamber. She described how human soldiers had carried wounded Altarian civilians to safety while under heavy fire, how human medics had worked for days without rest to treat victims of Vorthan torture, how human engineers had rebuilt and destroyed cities without asking for payment or political concessions. The Deathworlders hadn't come as conquerors or liberators seeking glory. They had come as protectors who understood that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. Admiral Davis watched the proceedings from the military observers section, still wearing his combat uniform from the final liberation missions. His desk was covered with official documents, over 300 formal requests for mutual defense treaties from species across the galaxy. Every former Vorthan slave race wanted Earth's protection. The Admiral had become a legend throughout civilized space. Children on a dozen worlds knew stories of the human fleet that had appeared when all hope seemed lost. Veterans of the Liberation campaigns spoke of Davis with the reverence usually reserved for mythical heroes, but Davis understood something that the politicians didn't. This wasn't about one man or one battle or even one war. Humanity had revealed something fundamental about their nature that would change how every other species viewed them forever. The freed slave races had already begun constructing monuments to the human marines who had died liberating their worlds. Simple stone markers bearing the names of soldiers who had given their lives for beings they had never met. The inscriptions all carried the same message. These warriors had died so that others might live free. Council President Veltar finally grasped the magnitude of what had occurred. For centuries, the galactic community had operated under the assumption that each species looked out only for themselves. Political alliances were based on mutual benefit. Military cooperation required formal treaties. And intervention in other species' affairs only happened when there was something to gain. Humanity had shattered those assumptions completely. Earth had responded to a desperate cry for help from complete strangers, deployed massive military resources without any guarantee of compensation, fought a brutal campaign solely to protect innocent life. They had revealed themselves as something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that treated the suffering of others as their own responsibility. Davis addressed the assembled delegates with the same quiet confidence that had carried him through the darkest moments of the campaign. His message was simple and clear. When innocent beings called for help, Earth would answer. Distance didn't matter. Politics didn't matter. The odds didn't matter. The galaxy now had guardians who measured success not in territory conquered or wealth accumulated, but in lives saved and freedoms restored.